Now I lost it.
AV, there you go.
I'm sure you've all seen this online. This is, in actuality, a verse from the Quran. And kill them wherever you find them. Now, what does it mean? And them is sometimes translated, and they say kill the pagans wherever you find them. So you have people who are against Muslims, and you're going to find them saying, oh, kill all the pagans, you're here to kill us. That's what the Quran tells you to do. And yes, the Quran does say this. Nope. Thank you. How come I can't see you when you move it down? We have a thing called context. Okay? Context is where you find where this thing is in the transcript, in the book, in wherever you have this part that you took out, okay? And put it all. It says, fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. Indeed, God does not like transgressors. And kill them whenever you find them, and expel them from wherever they have expelled you. And fitna, or fitna is trials, persecution, etc., is worse than killing. And do not fight them at the Masjid al-Haram, which is the holy Mecca, the building in Mecca that we go to, until they fight you there. But if they fight you, then kill them. Such is the recompense of the disbelievers. And if they cease, then indeed God is forgiving and merciful. Fight them until there is no more persecution and until worship is for God. But if they cease, there is to be no aggression except against the oppressors. Now, when you're looking at this, if they cease, what does that mean? They're fighting you, okay? My dad was military, 30 years. He went to Vietnam. Now, a person from Vietnam, you know, I guess it was the Viet Cong is what they called them. The Viet Cong was fighting against him. He actually has a story where they were on a ship full of soldiers, and this little boy, he said it was about the age of my brother at the time, and my brother was like 4 or 5 years old at that time. And he said this little boy, when they found him, he had stowed away. When he came up, he was covered in grenades, ready to kill himself. My dad said that he had to pick up this child, and he has nightmares to this day, and throw him into the ocean. But what is the alternative? Death. Everybody on that ship would have died. So it's him or us. So the history before that verse, because that's also important, it's not just the verse and the context. What happened for that verse to be revealed? The message started in Mecca, okay, which is a place in Saudi Arabia. When they were in Mecca, the people of Mecca did not want the message. They were worshiping statues. And they didn't want the idea of that there is one God and you worship that one God. They had many gods, and they were making a lot of money from the people coming from other places to the Kaaba, and inside there were a bunch of different statues because everybody brought offerings to their God. They didn't like the idea of losing the money that they were getting from all these caravans from all over Arabia. So when the message is there's one God, he's not a physical entity, you worship him directly, they weren't happy with that. They started killing and persecuting the people who became Muslims, to the extent that they were expelled from the city. And they spent actually some time in the desert with no food, nothing. People died because they were thrown out of the city. And then at one point, they actually got invited to go to a second city, and that the people of that city wanted to embrace Islam, to be Muslims. So they moved to that other city. War happened between Mecca and Medina, the two places that now were there. So in that war, first off, you're home. And is there any vegan here? No vegans? Oh, that's surprising. Vegetarians? No. Okay, imagine that this is a place where beef and lamb kinds of meat are the primary source of income. All of you live there. You like meat. You don't want to give it up. You want your big fat steak. Well, every time you try to go make a steak, they come in and they beat on you. Or they kill you because we don't accept it here. But this is your home. You've been here your entire life, but you like steak. They killed your sister, they killed your brother, and they come and they beat on you on a regular basis, they abuse you. So you leave. And you lose your home, you lose all your property, all your money. You just take off in the middle of the night to get away. That's exactly what they did. They ran away. How do you feel about these people? Anyone? Are you happy with them?
Not at all.
Not at all. Now, they've come and they start waging war on the place that you're at now. Are you going to fight them? Or are you going to say, go ahead, kill me. Here I am. Are you going to fight back? You are. Let's add to that, okay? Family. Some of those people are your cousins. Some of those people are your uncles. So you got family, right? How do you feel now about fighting against your family? It's hard, but they're trying to kill you. Finally, there's a victory and a return. When that victory happened, the prophet, peace be upon him, he's like, we're going to forgive everybody. And then there was revelation that said, no, not everybody. The ones that are at the top, the greedy ones, the ones that they created all these problems because they didn't want to lose the money from the caravans, those people are going to be giving a choice. And your choice is, you have 4 months to think about it. You can become a Muslim, or like you did to us, you're no longer allowed to come back to Mecca. You're going to be expelled from the land. Okay? That's your choice. You don't have to be a Muslim, but you're not going to come live here anymore where you were murdering us and you were in charge of that. The war criminals, as you would say here, right? So at that point, that's where it said, kill them where you see them. After the 4 months, if they came back, it's a death sentence. If they stay away, go live your life. Nowadays, you have war criminals. What happens to them? The big ones at the top.
They're imprisoned or killed.
Mostly killed. The top leaders are usually killed. Saddam Hussein, put to death. The war criminals from World War II, the Nazis, put to death. The ones in Bosnia Serbian War, the ones that did the ethnic cleansing, and that's exactly what they were doing. It was a religious cleansing. They were killing people right and left. Those people put to death. So that's exactly it, except they were given another choice: leave. You can live, but we don't want you here. Okay? So that's how that happened. So if you are against a people, anything they do, you make it look bad. This is the reality. If you don't like someone, they can be doing something fantastic. Oh, look, Mary's in the courtyard and she's giving out free food to the homeless. That's a good thing. But you don't like Mary. Man, she is causing all the problems that America has. All these homeless are there because people like her are feeding them. If you don't like someone, you will find a way to make even their good look bad. Perspective, right? Okay, so that is the history of that verse. So next time you see someone saying, yeah, they're supposed to kill us, in the Quran it says this. It does say that. It most definitely says that, but it has a context. It doesn't mean that I, as a Muslim, am supposed to find any pagan and go kill him. It was a specific group of people for a specific circumstance in a specific time. If that circumstance comes back up again, then we are allowed to do the same thing. It's a precedent for how we deal religiously, ethically, morally, and legally with people who do this. Okay? Now, this is probably just a review for you. Ethics versus morals. Ethics are external codes of conduct based on society. Morality is internal codes of conduct based on a personal compass of right and wrong, and is often connected to belief in a higher power. In Islam, both are the same. We believe that God created rules, and we follow those rules because as a higher power, he has the knowledge of the past, the present, and the future, and all possible permutations of every future. So if we follow his rules, it's not that life will be perfect, but you take away problems that would have existed because you didn't follow what you were supposed to follow. I'll give you an example for that. Young girl is married. She and her husband, she wears herself something super sexy. They're going out. She's with her husband. In the car, they get into a fight. They're heading to a nightclub. They get to the nightclub and they both start drinking, and they've been fighting. So she decides, and this actually happened, by the way, someone in my family. She decides, what is she gonna do? She's gonna go flirt with some guy at the bar. She's a little tipsy, her husband's a little tipsy. They're fighting, and she's flirting, and she looks good. What do you think happened?
Oh, there was a fight ensued.
There was a fight that ensued, exactly. And when that fight ensued, the husband was arrested with the other guy. She calls me up and she's like, my husband's in jail because of this and this and this. And I did what I could for them, but at the same time, I'm sitting there thinking, this would never happen to me. Number one, I wouldn't be dressed in a way to invite others and let them know, because this is like a do not disturb sign. When you see me like this, you know this is not the woman I'm gonna go looking for, because she's telling me right off the bat, not available, right? Number two, so that wouldn't have been an issue. Number two, I don't drink. Muslims are not allowed to drink. We don't go to places where people are drinking. So I would never have been in a bar. There is no relationship between males and females except through marriage. So I wouldn't be flirting with another man. So it is 100% impossible for that situation to happen to me. So how I act, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad is based on what God says, because he has the knowledge of how to protect us from ourselves. Because if we only go by what we want and what we desire, we can go way out there, okay? So in Islam, ethical rules are extrapolated from the Quran and the Sunnah. Everything that is considered an ethical dilemma in the West is subject to shura, okay? What is shura? And we're talking about those things that were not covered. And last year I did a lecture here and we were talking about surrogacy. It doesn't exist in the Quran, because in that time there was no such thing as a surrogate. There was no such thing as in vitro fertilization. So we had to, as a Muslim nation, come up with an understanding of what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed. How is that done? It's essentially parallel to the democratic principle in Western political thought, having analogous aspects about the same tendencies or direction. It is predicated on three basic concepts. In other words, it's like done here. How do they decide what's ethical and what's not ethical? The best minds in that field sit together and they discuss. They come up with the idea, is this right or is it wrong, based on their knowledge of the subject matter, okay? First, all persons in any given society are equal in human and civil rights. That's the basis. Second, public issues are best decided by majority view. Third, the three other principles of justice, equality, and human dignity, which constitute Islam's moral core and from which all Islamic concepts of human and civil rights derive, are best realized in personal as well as public life under shura. In other words, the decision is made by the shura. The shura is consultation, okay? And again, this is normally done by the best minds in that field. And you put them with the best minds in understanding Islamic sciences, understanding what is and is not, the Islamic scholars. Shura as a principle is rooted in the Quran itself. The Quran has presented shura as a principle. It is not as a system of governance, The distinction is important to note because the Quran thereby has left it to successive generations of Muslims to continue to strive towards a more perfect realization of the Shura principle. That is why some countries allow certain things and some countries do not. Some of the countries, they add culture into what they decide to be rules for the nation. Some countries, it's just purely, if it's in the Quran, if it's in the statements of the Prophet, we accept it. If it's not, we don't accept it. And some countries, it's like, and we're going to also include what is our understanding of what was meant by this, okay? So when it comes to something like in vitro fertilization, what did they decide? They decided that this is the same thing as a husband and a wife, except it's just got a little extra help. There's no problem with it. As long as it's between a husband and a wife, yes.
When you talk about gathering these groups of authority who then speak on these subjects, are both genders part of this collaboration and discussion?
Yeah, in Islam, we have different levels of leadership, okay? But when you're talking about a shura is a meeting of, and it's not like a, well, in some places it's a convention because there's so many. But like in the country, you are the leader of the country. You have a question that needs to be answered. In vitro fertilization. So what do? You gather together the best doctors on this subject. You gather together the scholars. Put them together in a room and let them discuss it until they come up with an answer. And that becomes the law.
So gender wouldn't be a factor? It's just
No,
the best
because
deal.
when it comes to Islam, the man leads the prayer, okay? If there's men and women together, the men lead the prayer. The men in front, the women behind them. Now, again, men are what kind of creatures? Visual. Have you ever seen the Muslim prayer? Any of you? Okay, it's a prostration, which means your face and hands on the ground, your rear end up. Now, the males in here. Quick question. How well can you concentrate on the prayer if Beyonce is praying in front of you?
Not very likely.
Not very likely, okay? In general, if a female is praying in front of you and her rear end is up in the air, your concentration becomes probably nil, okay? To the extent that in the first days, there used to be this woman that was extraordinarily beautiful. And sometimes in the prayers, if she came to the prayers, some of the men, when they went down to bow, they would literally look under their arm to see her. And that's behind. So imagine if the women are in front of the men. So for that reason, in a mixed group, men are first and women are second. Not because they are superior. Because in Islam, there's no such thing as men are superior and women are superior. In the Quran, it actually says, men have superiority over women for a reason. And by that superiority, it means that in a family unit, the final word goes to the men. It doesn't mean they don't discuss. The Prophet, peace be upon him, used to discuss with his wives, and he often changed his mind on rulings because his wives brought up a point that he considered to be better. It doesn't mean that. It means that if you have a situation where the man and the woman do not agree, there has to be a leader. There has to be somebody to break it or the marriage will break. So if the woman knows, okay, final decision is going to be with him. Now, if I married an idiot, which happens, and all his decisions are stupid, I can divorce him. It's easy. But if I trust the man that I married, normally the men will make decisions that are good and conducive for the family. They're not going to destroy their family. And again, if they're stupid and they do that, goodbye. It's an easy process. So, so the imam of the prayer is one. The second level, which is a higher level, because anybody can be imam. As long as he knows the words of the prayer, he can lead, is the scholar. There is not one of the main, there's 4 schools of thought. There were 4 original main scholars that are from the first few generations of the Prophet, after the Prophet. These four main, all of them had female teachers. Female scholars have existed from the beginning. The wife of the prophet, Aisha, peace be upon her, she was a scholar. She was a doctor, she was a Islamic scholar, and she was a scholar of language. And she had a flawless memory. So she's one of the first scholars in Islam, and she was a woman. So a scholar is a different level from an imam, and it's a higher level. If you have a question, you find a scholar, and you ask the scholar, and the scholar will tell you, well, in the Quran it says this, in the statements of the Prophet it says this, and this is what other scholars have said throughout the centuries, and this is my understanding of it. And that's how you get your knowledge. And that's also where you get the danger, because you're in a small town in Bangladesh, and your scholar is an unscrupulous person who's out for the money, or, and number one, scholars shouldn't be taking money. So if your scholar is taking money, you know you have a problem, okay? If your scholar is filthy rich off of the people, you have a problem. This is not a real scholar. But a lot of people, there's ignorance everywhere. So they see somebody that appears to be religious, appears to know everything, they go to them and they ask them a question, and that person answers based on his or her political or financial desires, not based on what is actually in the Quran and the statements of the Prophet. And that's where you end up with terrorists, because they ask the wrong person the questions, and that person doesn't really have knowledge, okay? Every Muslim is encouraged to become a student of knowledge, which means we were told, gather knowledge even if you have to go to China. And imagine what it would have taken to go from Mecca, Saudi Arabia, to China in those days. We are encouraged to read and learn and seek out knowledge. The vast majority of Muslims are highly educated because they do look for knowledge. And again, it also depends on your relationship with God. If you're living life for life, your relationship with God is not the same as the one who, I'm living life because this life is a test for the next life. So I'm trying to get knowledge to know what is right, what is wrong, and what's the best way to live my life to have peace and have the least amount of problems. We liken it to, he's our creator. As our creator, he knows everything about us. If you were a mechanical engineer and you created a vacuum cleaner, who knows better than you how to make sure that that vacuum cleaner is at optimal performance? No one. Every nut, every bolt, every wire, you did it. So you know how to make sure that that works perfectly. So we believe God created us and he knows every aspect of us, mental, physical, spiritual, and how to keep us at peace and have the easiest life, which, again, no such thing as a perfect life. Next, ethics. In terms of ethics, Islam has many prescribed codes of conduct for everyday life. For instance, honesty and its limits, interactions within the family, society, the world, permissible versus impermissible, cheating, stealing, killing, human and non-human, intoxication. The idea of shura is used as a method to distinguish how the matter is to be considered when there is no specific explanation, prescription, or mention. The final decision is called a fatwa, okay? And you've heard, oh, there's a fatwa against so-and-so to be killed. Who made the fatwa? Was that person really qualified to make a fatwa? There are, there's no such thing as a Muslim government in the world. Every government in the world now that is majority Muslim population is ruled by a combination of Western law and Islam, okay? So if it was done by the head of such and such country, that doesn't mean that this is Islam or that it's truly a fatwa. It means that the head of such and such country made a decision, okay? Now, the fatwa has to be made by the Islamic scholars with the scientific scholars that match what the fatwa has to do with. So when you're looking for a fatwa, you need to make sure it was done correctly. And again, ignorance prevails. Most people don't know. Like right now, if you had a question about something within your own religion, who would you go to? Who would you ask? Your minister. What if your minister is in it for the money, but you don't realize that? Then his answer is going to be different than the minister who's in it for God. So it's easy for people, because if you haven't read everything, then you don't know whether what they're saying is true or not true. Correct? So you go to that person and you will follow them because you think that they know when they don't. How many people today are what we call flat earthers? You seen them? They honestly and truly believe that they have the scientific evidence that the earth is flat. But they haven't really read everything, have they? Or they don't believe what they read. So ignorance is, like I said, everywhere. So let's go to this. Honesty and its limits. In Islam, you're supposed to be honest in everything. But there are 3 exceptions. Number 1, you're at war. Let's say you are a prisoner of war, and they take you and they've got you, and you know where the rest of the troops are. Do you have to tell them the truth? No. You're allowed to lie, and you're encouraged to lie in that situation. Okay? And there's not a soldier alive today that believes that it's best to tell the truth in that situation. Okay? So that's 1. 2, it is allowed to lie to bring together 2 parties, let's say it could be individuals, it could be groups, that are at odds with each other. I keep looking at you because you're in front, sweetheart. It's not personal. You and your husband are having a problem. And you've moved down and gone to your mom's house. I'm leaving you. I can't take it anymore. The kids, get your bags. Let's go to mama's. You're at your mama's house. We see that there's potential. You love him. He loves you. It was a stupid fight, but maybe one of you is a little bit too stubborn to try to go to the other one. So, somebody will come to him and say, you know what? She wants to make up with you. She loves you. She misses you. But she just, she doesn't want to make that first step. Well, let's go out to dinner and we'll meet with her. And somebody will come to you and say, he loves you. He's an idiot and he knows it, and convinces you to meet with them. You're lying to each other, but you're trying to create peace. So in that situation, it's allowed to lie. And the third situation is a husband and a wife. There are times when you need to lie to each other, and I'm not talking about he goes out and cheats on her 200 times and he lies to her. I'm talking about simple situations. Honey, do I look fat? Yes, you do. You're allowed to lie. Things that preserve the peace in the family between a husband and a wife, and again, not to the extremes, you're allowed to lie to each other, to make each other happy, and to keep that love bond together. There are times in a marriage where you're going to be like, I really hate him. I hate him more than I hate anything in this world. But you want to keep the marriage together, so it's like, honey, I love you. It's a lie at that moment. But that preserved the marriage enough that in a few days, when you're no longer pissed at each other, you're back to happy again. You understand? So there's in everything in Islam, there's a rule and there's an exception. And the exception is something that's supposed to make life easier. Okay? Interactions within the family, society, and the world. We talked about why the woman covers. This is an interaction. And it is done in order to preserve the thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not fornicate. Because as human beings, we have hearts, we have feelings, we have desires. In Islam, all of this there's nothing wrong with loving. There's nothing wrong with having a desire. Males, in general, have desires for females, correct? So if you have the desire for a female, it becomes more difficult the more that the thing that you like is presented to you, and the way that it's presented to you. And we have all kinds of desires in life. Okay, in Islam, even eating, it's supposed to be 1/3 food, 1/3 liquid, water, and 1/3 air. That should be your meal. So that you keep, always the stomach is a little bit empty. Do we do that? I don't. One of my biggest trials in this life is food, as Mary can attest. If any of you ever see my Instagram, it is food. I love to cook and I love to eat. We were talking about that last night. I absolutely love food, so it is a trial for me. It's a desire. There is nothing wrong with having a desire for food, but like everything else, there has to be a limit. If you allow desire to go to its ultimate limit, there is no limit, but to its ultimate, it can become very dangerous for you as a human being, and sometimes dangerous for society. So one of the desires that human beings have is the desire to procreate, okay? The desire for intimacy. There is, in Islam, which is slightly different from what I was raised with in Christianity. I was a Catholic. I was taught that, in general, the very idea of desire has a sin to it. It goes back to the sin of Adam and Eve, okay? So there's that something in the back of your mind, whether you're married or not married, that the sexuality itself has something bad to it. Islam says no. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a desire. There's nothing wrong with fulfilling your desire. It is encouraged. We believe that but it has its limits, and that limit is marriage. Okay? You have to be married to the individual that you are fulfilling your desire with. And in Islam, we believe that if you are unmarried and you fulfill that desire, there is a sin on you. If you are married and you fulfill that desire, there are blessings on you. So it's the other side of the scale. Because if you were to do it in the wrong way, you'd have sin. So God gives you a blessing every time you're with your husband or every time you're with your wife. And it's open. Enjoy yourself. There is absolutely no guilt associated with sexuality within marriage. So everything is either permissible or impermissible. Okay? So this is all background on ethics, right? In Islam. Jihad. You've all heard the word, right? Jihad has an actual meaning. The Arabic word jihad is often translated as holy war, but in a purely linguistic sense, the word jihad means striving or struggling, okay? I have a video online where I say I am a jihadi. I am a person who makes jihad. My father is a Christian. My father is a jihadi. Each and every one of you is a jihadi. It's not that you don't make jihad. It's jihad for this reason and for this goal. I am a jihadi when it comes to food. I have to fight my internal desires to not eat what I'm not supposed to eat. Okay? That's a struggle. And it can sometimes be a greater struggle than taking a gun and shooting someone who's trying to shoot me. That is a lot easier than some of the struggles that we go through as human beings. For me, and my children ask me this question every day, Mom, what was the hardest thing for you to give up when you became a Muslim? Y'all know my answer? Can you think of it?
Barbecue.
Pork.
Pork. Yep.
Pork. One of my favorite foods in the world. I was 5 years old. My grandma lived across the street from this butcher, and that butcher made ham. My grandma would give me money, and I would go across the street and get a few slices of ham and just sit there and eat it. For lunch as a teenager, a piece of ham with a piece of German cheese in the middle, roll it up, and that was lunch. I loved pork. And let's not even talk about bacon. Not even talk about bacon. So that was a jihad. Giving it up was very difficult. So I honestly believe God knows things that I don't know, so I'm going to follow what God says because He knows what I don't know. And I trust Him. And that's what you have to do as a Muslim. You have to say, God knows what I don't know, and I'm gonna follow what he does, what he says. Now, in everything I've seen in Islam, there's a logical reason behind anything. That's why I said to y'all, ask me any question. Because one of the things that attracted me to Islam is that it's very logical. If you think about why people do what they do, it makes sense. So, the Arabic word jihad is the struggle. So I learned to give up pork. Now my sons were born and raised as Muslims. They never had pork, and they lived, and from the time my youngest was 2 years old, they were in Kuwait, where the idea is like, if I said to you, let's have dog, same mentality. If I said, let's go eat some dog, how would you feel? Yuck, right? That's the idea they had in their mind. So when they asked me this and I said pork, they're like, ew, disgusting, a pig, yuck. I'm like, okay, because y'all don't know. You never tasted it, you have no clue. Barbecue sandwich from Maurice's, never had one of those. Okay, so we went on vacation one time, and I took them to Puerto Rico. We went to a restaurant on the beach, beautiful seafood and steak restaurant, very expensive. But mommy wanted seafood and steak, and I'm like, whatever you want, Mama. We get there, we tell them, we want this and this, make sure there's no pork in anything. Waiter's like, no problem. He goes, he brings us the food, we're eating. My son is cutting his filet mignon, and he's eating, and then he's like, and then he goes, bacon was wrapped around it. I'm like, okay. We tell the waiter, he literally, you could hear the screaming. We got our whole meal free. We get back to the hotel, we're in the hotel, and my son, he was a teenager at the time. He comes to me and he sits on the bed, he's like, Mom, I want to talk to you about what happened today. I said, look, if you do something without knowing, there's no sin on you. Ignorance, ignorance of something doesn't make you a sinner, but once you know, you should not repeat it, okay? He's like, no, I know that. It's like, Mom, I have to confess. I get it. I understand now.
He likes it.
He's like, that's the best thing I ever had in my life. Okay? So, struggle. Long story short, struggle. You have to struggle daily. The word in Arabic for war is harb. Harb means war. So holy war, okay, would not translate as jihad. Now jihad, part of jihad is a physical struggle, but it has rules. It's not as you wish. Now in a religious sense, as described by the Quran and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, jihad has many meanings. It can refer to internal as well as external efforts to be good Muslims or believers, as well as working to inform people about the faith, the faith of Islam. So if you are teaching people what is Islam, and we don't have missionaries per se. If you want people, every Muslim's duty is to tell people this is Islam. Now it's up to you. You want to be a Muslim? Become a Muslim. You don't want to be a Muslim? Go on. To you be your religion, to me be my religion. You're not allowed to try to force somebody to convert. So that is actually not true. As a matter of fact, when the Muslims conquered Spain, the non-Muslims over the centuries became Muslims on their own. Now there is such a thing as a tax for non-Muslims, and this tax is a very small amount, okay? It's not, in many countries now they don't do it at all, but it's allowed for the government to tax the non-Muslims. There's also a tax on Muslims. The tax on Muslims is higher than the tax on non-Muslims. And it's a certain percentage of your savings that you have for 1 year. It's 2.5% of what has stayed constant in your savings, not your salary, whatever, of constant in your savings for 1 year. So and the savings has to be above what's the worth of 2.5 grams of gold. So let's say that amount is $5,000, okay? you've had $5,000 for a 1-year period, your money has never gone below that 5,000. You pay on that 5,000. Understood? That's for Muslims. Non-Muslims, there's just like a 1 or 2% tax on them. So everybody has it, and again, not every country uses it, but it's flat tax for everyone. Everyone pays the same amount, except non-Muslims have a lower amount, because the Muslims believe that in giving this, they're cleaning their wealth. They're giving it back to God. Okay? So, Spain became fully Muslim because the people themselves converted. Palestine, now known as Israel, this area is the only place in the world that has never, until the present situation, never gave a problem to Jews. Every other country in the world that Jews went into, they were persecuted and killed. They lived for centuries side by side until the problem that the modern problem that we have. So Muslims and non-Muslims have lived in peace for centuries. This new problem, it's in 1920s or 1930s is when it started, with the White Papers and the Balfour Agreement. At that time, that's when it started, right after World War II. Okay, 1940s. Thank you.
48.
Yeah. If military jihad is required to protect the faith against others, it can be performed using anything from legal, diplomatic, and economic to political means. If there's no peaceful alternative, Islam also allows the use of force. But there are strict rules of engagement. Innocents, such as women, children, or invalids, must never be harmed, and any peaceful overtures from the enemy must be accepted. But there is a rule in this one. You accept peace, but it has to be peace with the power to protect the peace, if that makes any sense. You can't just, okay, we just want to have peace, but you can't defend yourself against them if they decide to break the contract. You have to be able to protect yourself, okay? Military jihad. Military action is therefore only one means of jihad. In case of military action, in case military action appears necessary, not everyone can declare jihad. The religious military campaign has to be declared by a proper authority. Shura. What's shura? The scholars with the people that have the knowledge. Advised by scholars who say the religion and people are under threat and violence is imperative to defend them. The concept of just war is very important. The concept of jihad has been hijacked by many political and religious groups over the ages in a bid to justify various forms of violence. In most cases, Islamic splinter groups invoke jihad to fight against the established Islamic order. Scholars say that this is a misuse of jihad and it contradicts Islam. Okay? In Islam, there are rules. You may not kill an innocent. It's very clear. What do most terrorists do? They target innocents. In jihad, you are not allowed to have a war as a small group. It has to be a nation, and it has to be declared by the scholars with the military, with the head of the government. Any of these groups do this? No. But it's a very clear concept in Islam. What happens is you end up with people that in some way or shape or form are messed up. Either you have somebody that has a psychological problem. The guy who blew up the gay nightclub in, was it Florida, right? What was his problem? He was gay. He was trying to deny that he was gay. He was attracted to the gays. He used to go to that bar. So there's a mental problem here. He is struggling to put Islam with his desires. And he wasn't able to do that. So he hated them, blamed Islam, went in, jihad. That's not jihad. Okay? That's one kind of person who does what's currently called jihad, or terrorism, which it really is. The second kind is a political group that wants to get power somewhere, right? Everybody know who that group is these days? ISIS. A political group. And I want you to take a look again, knowledge is power, right? It is absolutely forbidden, completely forbidden to wage war during the holy months. There's 4 holy months. During those months, if you can stop, if you're in the middle of a war, you should stop it. If you can't stop it, then you can do it, but you should try to stop it. If you are thinking about going to war, you can't start it at that point. Take a look at how many terrorist jihad acts are done in Ramadan. Ramadan comes in and you know there's going to be an act. In Kuwait, which is a what? Muslim country, right? Or Muslim populated country, okay? During Ramadan, a guy from Saudi Arabia walked into a Shiite mosque and killed himself and a whole bunch of other people. And he said this is jihad. Okay, start. Forbidden during the holy month to make jihad, right? So he's already gone against what Allah told him is allowed in a military. 2, your country did not declare war, right? With that mosque. So that's 2. You're out of there. 3, you're not allowed to kill innocents. 4, he went into a holy building to kill. We're not even allowed, like it's allowed to, if I need to make my prayers, I'm allowed to go into a church and pray. But if that action is going to cause a problem to those people, either while I'm doing it or in the future, it's forbidden for me to do that. One of the leaders after the Prophet, peace be upon him, Omar, he was in Jerusalem and he wanted to go in and pray, and the church said, come, you can use our place to pray. He's like, no, I'm afraid that after me, Muslims will come because I prayed here and destroy the building or take it away from you. So he wouldn't go in and pray there, not because it was a Christian building, but because he was afraid of what might happen as a result. Okay? So jihad has rules. A Muslim in a Muslim country broke every one of those rules. Does that mean that he's making it, could it possibly be jihad? No. Right now you have Christians and they walk into, in South Carolina we had it, a Christian walked into a church, right? And what did he do? In Charleston? Massacred.
8 or 9 people.
Yeah, while they were praying. Is that allowed in Christianity?
No.
But he, as a good Christian, in his mind somehow justified it as something that Jesus would be accepted, right? But it's not. Just because I say I'm doing something for this sake, it doesn't mean that it's correct. If I say I'm doing something for Islam and I'm in a bar drinking, and I'm doing it for Islam, does that make it okay? No. And does it make it Islam? Does the religion change because of my actions? No. Crazy people exist everywhere. Ignorant people exist everywhere. Okay? Next. What is terrorism? And Mary told me that you guys went through some of this, but quickly. The unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. Dictionary, right? DOD, Department of Defense. The United States Department of Defense defines terrorism as the calculated use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear, intended to coerce or intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological. And 3 key elements: violence, fear, and intimidation, right? The FIBIs, FBI, defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment therein in furtherance of political or social objectives. My son really liked this slide. He's like, what is terrorism? Islam. Because that seems to be the definition these days. Thousands of Islamic jurists attended an anti-terrorism and global peace conference, and they published a fatwa, shura. This is how we reach what is what? And this is what they defined it as. There's a world of difference between terrorism and jihad. Jihad is constructive and terrorism is destructive. Jihad is the establishment of peace. Terrorism is the gravest of crimes as held by the Quran and Islam. Any action that targets innocence, whether as an individual or a government or by a private organization anywhere in the world, constitutes, according to Islam, an act of terrorism. Essentially, they're all the same, right? The decision is the same. What does the Quran say? God does not forbid you from showing kindness and dealing justly with those who have not fought you about religion or have driven you out of your homes. God loves just dealers. And if anyone slays a person, unless it be for murder or spreading mischief in the land, and that's like capital punishment, it would be as if he slew all people. And if anyone saves a life, it would be as if he saved the life of all people. Okay, so does the Quran say, go kill all the non-believers? Does it say that? It does, but it's not talking about all the non-believers. It's talking about a specific group of people in a specific time period, right? This is for everyone. Also, the recompense for an injury is an injury equal to in degree, but if the person forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from God. For God loves not those who do wrong. Indeed, if they do help and defend themselves after wrong done to them, against such there is no course to blame. The blame is only against those who oppress men with wrongdoing and insolently transgress beyond the bounds through the land, defying right and justice. For such there will be a penalty grievous in the hereafter. But indeed, if any show patience and forgive, that would truly be an affair of great resolution. So if someone harms you, we do believe an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And sometimes it's quite literal. One of the leaders, the same one, Omar, he had a son. His son slapped someone, okay? And son of the ruler, he did something wrong. Usually people will forgive him, right? Well, this guy brought his grievance to the ruler. He said, your son slapped me without any cause. So what did Omar tell him? He slapped you. You have the right to slap him. If you forgive him, it's better, but you still have the right to slap him. And what did the guy do? He slapped him. An eye for an eye. So if somebody tries to harm you, you have the right to harm them back in the same way that they harmed you. And usually that is a deterrent for the person. If you know that you're going to get back what you did to me, then more than likely it'll help stop you from doing it. Okay? What did the Prophet teach? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to prohibit soldiers from killing women and children, and he would advise them, do not betray, do not be excessive, and do not kill a newborn child. Among the things, there's a lot of different things, but you're not even allowed to chop down fruit trees in the land of the people that you're fighting. If somebody is a non-combatant cannot be killed. So you have somebody that is, you have a teacher. You can't go and kill the teacher because you're at war in that land. You have to take those that are fighting and fight them. The ones that are not fighting, you cannot touch them. Okay? He also said, whoever has killed a person having a treaty with the Muslims shall not smell the fragrance of paradise, though its fragrance is found for a span of 40 years. So if you were to travel for 40 years, you'd still be able to smell it. So what this means is, right now, does Saudi Arabia have a treaty with America? Are we at war or are we at peace? Peace. We have a treaty with them, right? There is an agreement between the two countries. We're not at war. And we have relations with them. So if any citizen of Saudi Arabia were to come and harm and blow up, like 9/11, something here in the United States, that would be a huge sin. It's very clear. If you read and you know. If you don't know, you pretty much can do anything. or be fooled into doing anything because you didn't go and read for yourself. Now, war and jihad. This
Funny.
time. Okay, this is the last thing. Take a look. You'll see that there's not too much difference. At the end, the criteria for when you can go to war basically is based on the country, right? Here, in Islam, if you are invaded, you can fight, okay? If you are persecuted, if your country is getting persecution, you're allowed to fight. If breaking of treaties that endanger the nation, you're allowed to fight. Now, I don't agree with what Iran is doing, the things that they're doing, but I want you to think about it. We had a treaty with them, right? America had a treaty with Iran. America broke that treaty, and they're hurting Iran. Iran has a right to retaliate that. But as America, we're like, no, they don't, because it's us. In Islam, if you break a treaty, and that breaking of that treaty hurts my country, I have a right to fight back. Usurpation of sovereignty. I have sovereignty over my country. If you try to take any of that sovereignty away from me to decide for me what I can and cannot do in our country, then you're allowed to go to war. All of us agree with this for our own countries. We don't agree for other people's countries. Perspective. Okay? And that's it. That's the last slide, and I'm sorry I'm late. So